in a nation collapsing under its own secrets. One man steps into the darkness to face a truth the world was never meant to see. A forgotten enemy has returned from the shadows. An army rises from the ruins of abandoned experiments. And a betrayal buried 12 years ago is finally coming alive. As Elias walks toward the threshold of a hidden world, he must choose between the nation he served and the truth that could destroy it. But what he finds waiting in the depths is not an enemy. It is someone he once trusted with his life. And now, the fate of the collapsing superpower rests on a decision he never wanted to make. The first cracks appeared long before anyone dared to speak of them. They spread quietly through the country's foundations, hidden beneath layers of pride and denial, like fractures in an ancient monument that once seemed too mighty to ever fall. Elias Carter felt those fractures before the nation did. He sensed them in the empty roads outside Washington, in the faint tremor under his boots as he walked the steps of the Capitol, and the way the morning air hung thick with a strange stillness that did not belong to a living capital. He had served the nation for 30 years. He had watched storms rise and pass, tensions flare and settle, and he believed the center would always hold. Yet something in this particular season felt different, as though the weight of history had shifted its balance and would prepare to crush what remained of the old order. The sun lifted slowly over the city, its light pale and cold. Elias paused beside a memorial stone and traced his fingers across the smooth engraving. His breath escaped in a slow exhale as distant sirens echoed across the Potomac. There were more sirens now than ever, ringing through the mornings like warnings that no one recognized soon enough. Inside the intelligence building, the lights buzzed with a faint electric pulse. Analysts drifted between desks with the tired steps of people who had not slept properly in weeks. Elias entered the briefing room and felt the weight of every pair of eyes turning toward him, searching for certainty he no longer carried. He opened the first classified file on the table. A line of red indicators ran across the map like veins filling with poison. Border conflicts, internal fractures, foreign influence running deeper than even the most pessimistic assessments had predicted. A knot tightened behind his ribs. He straightened his posture, though every instinct in him screamed that the ground beneath him was no longer stable. "Something is accelerating the decline," one of the analysts said, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias noticed a tremor in her hands as she pushed forward a new report. The pages rustled like dry leaves in a dying season. He read the document slowly. Then he read it again, forcing each detail into order. But the story it told refused to resemble anything that could be salvaged with simple strategy or political maneuvering. This was erosion at the deepest structural level, orchestrated with precision and patience. Outside the building, dark clouds gathered as though responding to an unseen signal. A low pressure settled across the city, heavy enough to sink into the lungs of anyone who dared to breathe deeply. Elias stepped out onto the rooftop to clear his thoughts. Yet even the wind felt different, colder, and carrying the faint scent of burning metal. He closed his eyes for a moment and listened to the city. The capital had always hummed with energy, ambition, and relentless motion. Today it felt strained, like an orchestra losing its rhythm, its harmony unraveling note by note. The first explosion struck at the far edge of the district. A deep reverberation rolled through the air, powerful enough to force Elias to brace himself against the railing. Smoke climbed swiftly into the sky, curling upward in a column of dark warning. His phone vibrated against his palm. The voice on the other end was sharp and urgent, yet carried a threat of fear that no military training could disguise. Another attack, another symbol of stability collapsing under coordinated force. Elias looked across the skyline, watching pieces of the nation he had sworn protect slipping into chaos. He felt a cold shiver run along his spine, not from the winter wind, but from the understanding forming slowly in his mind. Someone had anticipated every move. Someone had studied the vulnerabilities long before any defense agency recognized them. He hurried toward the exit, his footsteps echoing to the stairwell with a rising tempo that matched the pounding in his chest. The corridors below filled with urgent voices and hurried motions. Screens flickered with breaking alerts, each one more devastating than the last. A young agent approached him, her breath uneven and her eyes reflecting something between dread and determination. "We have intercepted a new transmission," she said. Her fingers tightened around the tablet she held. It suggests that this is only the beginning. Elias took the device, his pulse slowing as he read the message. It was brief, chillingly precise, and signed with a symbol he recognized all too well. The same symbol that had haunted his early career. The same adversary that vanished decades ago without explanation. The same force that now resurfaced with a plan sharp enough to carve through a superpower. He lowered the tablet and felt the truth settle heavily in his chest. The nation was not falling by accident. It was being broken by design. And the next move in this unfolding war was already in motion. Elias stood in the center of the operations floor, surrounded by scrambling officers and flickering screens. Yet he felt strangely still, as if the world had pivoted around him and he alone had remained unmoved. The transmission burned in his mind with ruthless clarity. The symbol at the bottom of the message carried a history he wished he had forgotten. A shadow from a conflict buried in classified archives and stained with the blood of people who never knew why they died. He moved toward the secure chamber. His footsteps were steady, but his breathing grew heavier with every step. The chamber door sealed behind him with a muted click, enclosing him in silence broken only by the hum of rotating hard drives. He activated the encrypted console, and the room dimmed, drawing him into a glow of blue light. The files he accessed were older than his career, older than most of the intelligence officers working outside this room. Each document carried a red warning across the top, signed by people who had vanished from the public record decades ago. Operation Halcyon, a covert alliance that was never fully dissolved, a threat that had gone dormant, not defeated, and now it had resurfaced with precision sharper than ever. His hand hovered over the final classified folder. A faint tremor passed through his fingers. He opened it. Inside the file was a single photograph, crisp despite its age. A meeting room, a long glass table, 8 chairs, 7 occupied, 1 empty. He remembered that room. He remembered the empty chair. And he remembered the agreement made in its absence. The enemy had never disappeared. It had only been waiting for the right crack to widen. The lights in the chamber flickered. An alarm pulsed softly somewhere in the building. Elias closed the files, his jaw tightening as he walked back out into the chaos of the operations center. A thick plume of smoke was spreading across the skyline. Helicopters roared overhead, slicing through the gray air like blades searching for a target they could not see. A digital map on the wall flashed red at 3 more locations, each one strategic enough to threaten the core of the country's infrastructure. An officer hurried to him, breathless. "We have a live feed from the central grid," she said. Her eyes looked as if she had glimpsed something she could not unsee. "It is worse than we thought." The video feed appeared on the main screen. Rows of giant transformers glowed with unstable energy, their metal skins vibrating as though they were alive. Technicians fled across the ground below, waving their arms and shouting warnings no one could hear through the static. Then the camera caught something that made Elias's blood run cold. A figure standing alone near the base of the grid. Still, unmoved, watching. The image distorted for a moment, as if the air around the figure bent unnaturally. Then the feed cut to black. A wave of whispers rippled across the operations floor, but Elias raised his hand and silenced the room. He stared at the dead screen, his chest tightening with a slow realization. The figure was not unknown to him. He had seen that stance, that posture, years before in a confrontation that never made it into official history. The man who should have been dead was now alive, standing at the heart of the nation's collapse. Elias stepped closer to the screen, as if he could force the image to return. His voice came out low and steady. "We need to secure the perimeter around the grid." The officer beside him swallowed hard. "Sir, the grid is already lost." He looked at her, and something in her eyes told him there was more. He could see fear, but beneath it, something like a hidden truth struggling to surface. "What else?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, pressing her lips together before leaning in just enough that only he could hear her. "The figure at the grid sent a direct transmission to your personal frequency." Elias felt the air around him tighten. "Show me." She handed him a sealed device. It flickered once, then displayed a single sentence. "I told you the fall would begin from within." Elias felt the blood drain from his face. He knew that phrase. He had heard it once, in a confrontation that left entire intelligence divisions in silence. A warning dismissed at the time as psychological warfare. But it had not been a threat. It had been a promise. He looked around the operations floor. Officers moved with increasing urgency. Reports came in from every direction. The nation was fracturing faster than they could respond. And still, the worst of the message had not yet arrived. The device in Elias's hand vibrated again. A new line appeared. "You know where to find me." Elias closed his hand around the device until his knuckles whitened. He understood the location referenced in that sentence. A location erased from national maps and buried in the deepest section of the intelligence network. A place built for secrets too dangerous for any ally or rival to know. He turned toward the exit with a deliberate calm that hid the storm in his chest. The director called after him. "Carter, where are you going?" Elias did not look back. "There's something I need to confront." He walked down the corridor, past the secured checkpoints, past the haze of smoke pushing into the air vents, past the officers shouting updates that no longer mattered. His steps carried a growing weight, as though the truth ahead would require more strength than he had left. Outside, the wind tore through the city with a rising metallic howl. Ash drifted in the air like gray snow. The streets trembled under distant impacts that shook the ground with deep, steady pulses. He approached the armored transport waiting by the curb. The driver looked at him with question in his eyes, but Elias simply signaled him forward. The vehicle sped into the evolving crisis, weaving through barricades and fleeing civilians, pushing deeper into the heart of the nation's unraveling. Yet Elias's mind stayed fixed on one thought. He had spent decades preparing for external threats. But this enemy had always been internal, a betrayal long dormant, a promise long forgotten. And now, as the city behind him burned under a sky growing darker by the minute, he knew that the next moment waiting for him in that hidden facility would change everything. The driver glanced at him through the rear-view mirror. "Sir, what is the plan when we reach the site?" Elias looked ahead at the empty horizon that seemed to stretch endlessly into a deepening dusk. "There is no plan yet," he said softly. "There's only the truth waiting for me inside." The transport continued forward, its engine rumbling to the quiet void of the outskirts. And just as the first stars tried to break through the thickening sky, another alert flashed across the dashboard, a warning so severe that the system repeated it twice. Elias leaned forward, reading the message, his breath stilled. The alert revealed something he had feared since the beginning, something far more dangerous than sabotage or coordinated attacks, something that would shift the crisis from national to global in an instant. But before he could order the driver to change course, the vehicle's communication system cut out, plunging the cabin into a sudden and unnatural silence, a silence that felt intentional. Elias straightened slowly, eyes narrowing at the dark road ahead. Something was waiting for them, something that had anticipated his every move. And as the transport rolled forward into the deepening night, the first shadow crossed the headlights. The shadow passed across the headlights with deliberate slowness, not like an animal fleeing from noise, nor a civilian trapped in the wrong place. It moved with purpose, as if it knew exactly who sat inside the transport and exactly what moment it wished to interrupt. Elias tensed, his hand drifting instinctively toward the side holster beneath his coat. The driver pressed the brake, and the vehicle shuddered to a halt. The engine rumbled softly, the only sound cutting through the heavy silence that had settled over the road. The figure stepped fully into view, a tall silhouette, shoulders squared, posture unbroken despite the biting wind. No insignia, no visible weapon, just presence, a presence that felt like an old echo Elias had hoped never to hear again. He opened the door slowly and stepped outside. The cold hit him immediately, sharp enough to bite to the layers of his clothing. Yet it was not the cold that tightened his chest. It was a feeling that this encounter had been orchestrated, not by chance, but by memory. The figure did not move at first. It simply watched him. The air between them grew thick with the kind of silence that carried history, regrets, and warnings unspoken. Then the figure lifted a hand and touched the side of his mask, triggering a dim pulse of blue light. A voice emerged, distorted, but unmistakably human. "You are late." Elias felt his jaw tighten. A familiar tone. Calm, measured, the tone of someone who had calculated every step before taking it. "What do you want?" Elias asked. The figure tilted its head slightly, as though studying his face for cracks in his composure. "You already know what I want. You knew the moment you opened that file." Wind swept across the empty highway, carrying with a faint smell of burning infrastructure from the collapsing city behind them. The driver stepped out cautiously, but Elias lifted a hand to signal him to stay back. The figure continued speaking, each word falling with the weight of a verdict. "The collapse you are witnessing is not the final phase. It is the invitation." Elias frowned. Invitation to what? To the reckoning your nation postponed for decades. A pulse of distant light flickered across the horizon, illuminating the clouds with the glow of an explosion far beyond the city limits. The ground trembled under Elias's boots as the shock wave rolled toward them, soft but unmistakable. The driver gasped, but Elias kept his eyes on the figure. "You orchestrated this," Elias said. "Orchestrated." The figure let out a quiet breath, almost resembling amusement. "No, I accelerated what your leaders refused to confront." The temperature around them seemed to drop another few degrees. Every instinct in Elias's body urged him to move, to call in reinforcements, to drag this man into custody. Yet another instinct, older, colder, held him still. "You were given a chance to prevent this," the figure said. "But your government chose silence. Protection of image over prevention of consequence." Elias shook his head. "That was years ago. The threat you warned about was neutralized." The figure stepped closer, slow and deliberate. Elias saw the faint outline of scars along the man's jaw beneath the mask. Scars he recognized. "Nothing was neutralized," the figure said. "Only hidden. And now the world will see what your nation buried." The driver moved closer, panic rising in his voice. "Sir, we need to leave. There are multiple alerts coming from the Southern Command. They are—" He stopped mid-sentence as his communication unit sputtered with static. The figure slowly raised a small device. "I disabled your channels," he said. "I need a conversation without interruption." "What conversation?" Elias asked. The figure paused, letting the silence stretch until the tension felt sharp enough to cut through the air. "The one that will determine whether anything survives the next 24 hours. Elias felt the weight of those words settle over him like ash. He stepped closer, just enough to see his own reflection in the mask's dull surface. "Then talk," Elias said, "before this spirals any further." The figure's posture shifted slightly, as if preparing for something far heavier than violence. "I want you to remember what happened in the Northern Labs 12 years ago," he said. "The experiment your agency denied. The disappearance your superiors erased. The truth you have never spoken aloud." A faint ringing filled Elias's ears. He had buried that memory deep, under duty, under loyalty, under layers of classified silence. But now it rose like a ghost clawing its way into the present. The figure stepped even closer, lowering his voice. "The breach did not begin today, Elias. It began the moment your leaders decided that power mattered more than consequence. And now the consequence is coming for all of us." Elias opened his mouth to respond, but another shock wave rolled across the horizon. Closer this time. The ground trembled beneath them. Flashes of red emergency lights lit up the far highway. The driver shouted, "Sir, something is approaching us at high speed." "It is not a vehicle." Elias turned, and his breath seized. A series of dark shapes moved along the distant ridge, coordinated, swift, and advancing with unnatural formation. The figure beside him looked toward the ridge and said quietly, "It is already too late to stop what they have released." Elias stepped back, pulse hammering in his throat. "What is that?" he demanded. "What did you bring here?" The figure did not answer. Instead, he reached for the mask's clasp with slow, deliberate movements. "If you want the truth," he said, "then you need to see who you are dealing with." Elias felt every muscle in his body brace as the figure lifted the mask. The wind stalled. The world seemed to still. Elias stared at the face revealed beneath the mask, a face he recognized, a face he had once trusted, a face that should have been buried years ago in a facility that never officially existed. "You," Elias whispered, breath tightening. "That is impossible." The man, alive, changed, and marked by something beyond human experience, stepped forward. "Impossible?" he said softly. "No, Elias. What is impossible is what comes next." The ridge trembled again. The advancing shapes grew clearer. The sky darkened with an unnatural shift of light. Elias took a step back, then another. "What did you unleash?" he asked. The man's answer came with chilling certainty. The final stage. Before Elias could respond, a piercing signal blared from deep within his transport. A coded alert meant only for top-level officials. He turned toward the sound, and the screen illuminated with a message that froze the breath in his lungs. A message revealing that the country's last line of defense had just failed, and the enemy now had access to something no nation on Earth was prepared to face. Elias's pulse thundered. He spun back toward the masked man, but the man was no longer standing where he had been. Only the cold wind remained, and the advancing shapes were now breaking over the ridge, descending toward Elias with chilling precision, as the final message on the screen repeated itself again and again. A message that would change everything the world believed about power, control, and survival. Elias took one step back, gripping the edge of the door as the sky above him darkened fully. He read the message one last time, and his eyes widened in disbelief. The message on the screen pulsed with an eerie glow, repeating itself in steady intervals that seemed to synchronize with Elias's heartbeat. Every time the words flashed, they carried the weight of a final warning and the cold clarity of irreversible truth. The last line burned brightest. "Strategic Barrier Zero has collapsed." Elias lifted his eyes to the ridge. The shapes moving down the slope did not break formation. Their movements were smooth, silent, and impossibly disciplined. There was no hesitation in their approach, no trace of human fear or confusion. They advanced as though guided by a single mind. The driver stepped closer to Elias, his voice trembling despite his attempt to appear composed. "What do we do now, sir?" Elias did not answer at first. He stood in the middle of the road, the cold pressing against his skin, the night folding in around him. His breath rose in faint clouds, barely visible against the darkening sky. There were moments in a man's life when instinct broke through the noise of fear, grief, and disbelief. Moments when clarity arrived not as comfort, but as duty. This was one of those moments. Elias drew in a slow, steady breath. "We do not run," he said. "We hold the line until we understand what we are facing." He moved toward the transport, placing a hand on the metal frame to steady himself. The ground vibrated beneath his boots as the ridge shifted with the weight of the descending formation. The driver looked at him with uncertainty. "Sir, they are almost here. We cannot outfight something we do not understand." "I know," Elias replied. "That is why we need information more than safety." He opened a secure compartment, retrieving a small black case no larger than his palm. The moment he touched it, the case activated, projecting a faint grid of light across his hand. The driver watched with wide eyes. "I have never seen that device before." "You were never meant to," Elias said. "This was created for a situation the government hoped would never arrive." Thunder rumbled in the distance, though the sky above remained dry. It felt as if the earth itself warned of something ancient waking beneath its surface. The first of the approaching figures stepped into the reach of the headlights. Elias saw the outline clearly now. Humanoid, armored, unnatural, but it was the eyes that froze him. Cold, pale, empty of all expression, yet filled with intent. The driver stepped back. "My God, that is not human." Elias remained still. His pulse slowed, not from calm, but from a deeper focus rising within him. "No, it is not," he said quietly. A sharp wind cut across the road, carried with it the distant echoes of collapsing infrastructure, alarms, and something far more unsettling, the faint metallic resonance of synchronized movement. Elias lifted the device in his hand. The grid of light intensified, releasing a thin beam that scanned the nearest advancing figure. As the beam passed over its armor, the device vibrated with a low hum. The screen displayed a symbol, the same symbol from the earlier transmission. The same symbol from a past mission buried in silence. The driver swallowed hard. What does that mean? It means, Elias said, they were designed from the same blueprint as the experiment that was shut down 12 years ago. The driver shook his head slowly. You mean they came from our own labs? Elias looked at the descending formation. Yes, we created the beginning of this. Someone else finished it. The formation closed in. Their steps were almost soundless. The world around them seemed to narrow into a single breathless moment. Elias took one final glance at the abandoned mask lying on the ground where the man had disappeared. The face he saw earlier, alive when he should have been dead, lingered in his thoughts like a final riddle. He had come back for a reason. To warn him. To challenge him. To force him to confront the truth buried beneath the nation's pride. The nearest figure stopped only a few steps away. Its pale eyes fixed on Elias. Its posture rigid and waiting. The device in Elias's hand lit again, flashing a new sequence of symbols, data, coordinates, a final encrypted instruction. The driver stepped closer, his voice a whisper. What does it say? Elias stared at the pulsing symbols. His expression tightened. It says they are not here to destroy us, he replied. They are here to collect someone. As if responding to his words, the figure raised its arm and pointed directly at Elias. A chill crept through his spine. The road behind him faded into stillness. The sky above darkened until not even starlight pierced the heavy air. The figures moved as one. Not hostile, not violent, but certain. The driver grabbed Elias's sleeve. Sir, do not go near them. We can escape. We can regroup. We can... Elias stepped forward. He did not know why. He did not know what awaited him. But he understood one thing with absolute clarity. This moment was not an ending. It was a beginning of the truth behind the fall. The lead figure lowered its head slightly, as if acknowledging his decision. A quiet vibration built in the air. The lights from the device intensified, casting long shadows across the ground. Elias clenched his jaw and prepared himself for what came next. The figures opened a path, and at the end of that path, a faint glow rose from the darkness. The entrance to something hidden beneath the earth, a place no citizen of the nation had ever been meant to see. Elias took the first step toward it. The driver called after him, but the world had already begun to fade behind Elias, swallowed by the gravity of the unknown. He walked forward, feeling the cold grow heavier, the ground softer, the silence deeper. And just as he reached the threshold, the glow shifted, revealing a silhouette standing within the light. The same man who had vanished moments earlier, waiting for him in the depths. Elias stopped, breath shaking for the first time. The man lifted his gaze. We are out of time, he said. Come with me. Elias stepped into the light, and the world above vanished.